you're ready.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. If you could excuse me for 1 minute, let me first get my other panelists to join the call. I think she has dropped off. Okay, now that we are fully constituted, one more time, if I could invite the first affirmative speaker, we are ready for you.
Okay, I'm going to start my speech in.
Madam, maybe we hold on a little cause we shall, excuse me, before you start, my first negator is not around.
Is around.
Should I start?
Do I have the first negative here?
Yes, first negator, I'm around. Owino Joel.
Okay, thank you very much. First affirmative, you can start.
Okay, so I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This House, as the UN, would support a more radical approach during COP28 in coordinating global efforts to combat climate change. So this debate is happening in a world where industrialization is at its peak, and we see that these industries produce.
Joel, confirm you are around, because I can't see you among the tiles here.
I'm around. Allan, I'm around.
Please, Allan, stop interrupting this debate, okay? Your speaker has said he's around. I believe he's around. Okay, I'll restart the timer. First affirmative, you could restart.
Okay, restarting in 3, 2, 1. This House, as the UN, would support a more radical approach during COP28 in coordinating global efforts to combat climate change. So this debate happens in a world whereby industrialization is at its peak, and these industries emit a lot of fumes that lead to increase of heat in the atmosphere, hence climate change, right? So how does the UN what is the UN, and how does it actually become an actor in the debate today? The UN is an intergovernmental organization whose stated purposes are to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, achieve international cooperation, and serve as a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. So the main reason why the UN would actually why it would be best for the UN to actually support this radical approach is that, number one, the UN actually has 183 member states, and if it is actually supporting this radical approach, we will actually see that we'll get funding, because the UN has enough funds to actually support this approach, as we're going to see that it actually needs funds to be able to actually be implemented, right? Then it will also help in providing like the involvement of other countries on the globe in this radical approach, because we have seen that it has 193 states. So if it is on board with this radical approach, then it will be easy for all the other countries to be involved, and then also have access to resources. So the resources actually needed in this whole thing to actually work out are in those countries. Those specific countries actually have them. So if they are all on board, we'll actually be able to get them and use them to implement what is needed. Yes. So moving on to climate change. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural, but since the 18th, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to burning fuels like coal, oil, and gas, which produce heat-trapping gases. So, Chair, we actually see that climate change is rising very fast, and its rise is actually very dangerous. To the globe. Its rising actually leads to things like food shortage. It leads to increase in temperatures, which actually cause diseases to people. It leads to more severe storms. Like increased weather conditions, whereby rain will become too much, and then it also leads to floods. It leads to poverty and displacement of people. It leads to drought, and it makes water sources unavailable. So as we have seen that those effects are actually going to harm our globe like very, very badly. I'm going to show you the reason why we need global efforts to combat climate change. Climate change is not only a problem of one country. It's not only because Uganda is emitting carbon fumes that it's going to only affect Uganda. If Uganda emits carbon fumes, it's going to affect like the whole globe. It's going to affect everyone. Everyone is at fault here, because actually the whole globe is using these fossil fuels that are actually leading to climate change. So since everyone is at fault and we need everyone's participation in combating climate change, it's very important for this global effort to be coordinated. It's very important for this global effort whereby everyone will come together to bring a solution to this problem. Then I'm going to explain what mainly we mean by radical. So radical is something considered extremist or very different from anything that has come before. And the radical approach that we as Team Proposition are bringing to table today is signing agreements and treaties with these countries. So agreements and treaties have been actually taking place, like people have been signing them, but the policies in those agreements and treaties have not been very radical according to what we are going to say. So they are saying that these agreements and treaties, the policies in them is that when the UN actually sits and comes up with a policy to combat climate change, then every country that has signed this treaty is mandated to follow this policy, no matter how much it's going to, let's say, endanger the country, endanger its economy. And Team Opposition might bring you to come and tell us that these radical measures are going to endanger country's economy, but ladies and gentlemen, climate change is actually going to bring way worse effects to the economy, comparing it to the radical measure that we are going to take. And
I'm up, speaker.
okay, I beg to repress my case.
Okay, we thank the first affirmative speaker for that fine speech. I will welcome the third opposition speaker to ask the questions. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. It begins in 3, 2, 1. So, Speaker, is technological advancement part of your radical approach in solving climate change?
The debate is not about solving climate change. Okay, it's partly about climate change, but it's mainly about coordinating the global efforts to actually combat climate change. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for your education. I'm still asking, is technological advancement part of your radical approach, Speaker?
Signing treaties and agreements is actually the radical approach that we are talking about, where these countries will actually sign treaties that will say that when you come up with a policy, then you're supposed to actually abide by it. And if you do not abide by it, we'll actually set a penalty on you, whereby will set a penalty on you whereby you're supposed to
Okay, thank you,
leave the
Speaker. Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I'm done. Okay, I'm satisfied. Speaker, can treaties be treaties be not be can forms of treaties not be accepted and be put in, can they not be put in place?
Could you please repeat the question?
Like, can treaties not be put in place?
I really don't get the question. Like, can't the treaties be put in place?
Okay, like, if we sign a treaty, can't I choose not to respect it?
Okay, time up. Time up. We'll receive the first negative speaker.
My name is Owino Joel, the first negative speaker, and my speech begins in 3, 2, 1. This House, as the UN, you would support a more radical approach during COP28 in coordinating global efforts to combat climate change. What do we mean by COP28 in this case? COP28 refers to the UN climate change conference that took place in Dubai in United Arab Emirates from 30th November up to 12th December. In this case, it is carried out annually, basically. So this is the 28th meeting since 1994. So basically, to focus on matters on deciding upon climate change and how will it be combated. So we basically have full membership, like full universal membership, basically. But we only have 193 heads, 193 states. So it involves head states, young people, business leaders, climate scientists, indigenous people, journalists, and various experts and stakeholders. So in this case, global efforts, these are many actions that are coming together to solve a particular problem. In this case, this is an actor motion. So our particular problem that we have to solve is climate change in this case. Our actor is the UN. What does the actor require in this case? The special interests of the actor are to combat climate action faster. And also, what is it within the specific interest of the UN? This is because it has the COP28 under itself. So it's its role to make sure that COP28, like the objective of combating climate change is achieved. So that's the specific interest of UN. Then we also come and we see Team Executive comes out and presents their case of supporting more radical approaches, of which they say signing treaties. But my dear judges panel, we see that these treaties have already been signed. You have the carbon footprint tax policy that is already there. It's there, but is it working? It's not there. It's not working. It's there, but it's ineffective. So how do we prove? How do we guarantee the effectiveness of another policy? Then we also see they come and they tell us treaties. Yes, treaties will be signed, but when will they be enacted? When the policies be enacted? This is time wasted. We know that climate change is something that needs urgency. It needs effectiveness. This is affecting us globally. So in this case, their point does not stand out of supporting radical approaches, and their example of a radical approach does not stand out. They come and they tell us they'll provide more. It will provide involvement of different countries when the radical approach is about it. My dear, want to acknowledge the fact that different countries have different economic statuses. So different countries cannot adopt that radical approach that they are bringing of the policy. So, and they also have different political governmental contexts. In this case, applying those policies in the different government contexts will be something that is very difficult and it will take a lot of time. So we will be wasting a lot of time. So as Team Negative, we come out and we tell this panel that as the UN, it should first develop the countries, these low developing countries, develop them and help them, support them develop and adopt sustainable practices that they can manage within their economic status. So in this case, after them managing, like they will be combating climate change at the same time. Then after climate change changing, we shall have agriculture being like versatile. Agriculture will increase. We shall have the economic growth happening. After the economic growth happening, then the UN will bring on the technology. In this case, after the technology has come, in this case, then the UN will combat it globally. So in this case, what are the disadvantages of bringing in the more radical approaches? These radical approaches may have policies that are pushing and risking and are so extreme that most nations will not abide with. So in this case, the nations will have to pull out. We are distracting international cooperation. We are hindering cooperation among ourselves. So why shouldn't we take this approach again? It is because it's expensive to other nations to carry out those policies. So how can you go like a nation like Uganda? How can you carry out, like, for example, the carbon footprint tax policy that was carried out and it failed? How could they carry it out? So even the second policy, which policy exactly? They did not clarify the policy in this case. Then we come and we tell it will take a lot of time to ensure that all countries adapt to that specific policy. So and yet climate change requires urgency in this case, my dear judges. So in this case, for effectiveness and urgency of climate change, they do not stand the point. And then during cross-examination, she clearly states that we are not yet solved the problem of climate change. But then what are we here to do in this case? Debate my panel. So in this case, we are here to solve climate change. We are not yet solving the problem again. We're solving climate change. The benefits that we shall be benefiting is international cooperation. We shall have more global cooperation. Like the global governance will be clear. Like everything will be clear in this case. She can't then give us the effects of climate change, which I realize right now because we do not need the effects of climate change for now. We need to know how do we solve the climate change. We're already seeing the effects are occurring. How do we solve it is the problem in this case. So over 193 states, over the head states, which means that if they are all at their different capacities, if they are left to continue to do with the sustainable practices that they can manage, and those developed countries also do the ones that they can manage. So when the UN measures and sees that you are almost like in the economic status is almost like reached like it's almost one level, then the UN will bring in the technology that will help to curb the climate change in this case, which are the precipitators and the autobots, like such things that do not bring out more carbon emissions in this case. With this, I would like to rest my case.
Thank you, Speaker. I will invite the third affirmative speaker to ask your questions. You have 1 minute.
To ask you 2 questions, and then you answer both of them at the same time. So you say that our side of the house is going to be wasting time, but putting a signature on a piece of paper, does putting a signature on a piece of paper take more time than developing a country? That is one. And secondly, when you talk about the fact that you're going to be combating climate, how are you ensuring coordination? Because this particular debate is saying that in coordinating global efforts, how are you going to be how is your policy coordinating global efforts? We agree it is actually solving climate change, but is it coordinating global efforts in combating climate change? Those are the questions. Thank you.
I do not speak about of my policy coordinating global because I did not give any policy in this case. So in this case, the UN is the one that is coordinating. So the UN, since it has all these members, that means there will be international cooperation. So the UN is our main center in this case. So the UN is the one that leads to cooperation, leads to international relationships in this case. So that point is out. Then we look at wasting time. Like it wastes time, yes. Like signing was. I didn't say that the countries will develop on its own. We all know that the UN has funds. The UN can fund everything. We all know that. So the UN and the countries will catch like hand in hand when they are also developing the country. At the same time, we're solving climate change. We are not only developing the country as per se, because for you are only signing the treaties and leaving them there waiting for the policy to be enacted. What are you doing again is climate change in this case. There is nothing that you're doing. So in this case, your approach does not work out. I rest my case.
Thank you very much. I will now welcome the second affirmative speaker.
Can I confirm if I am audible?
Sure,
Can
you
I confirm
are.
if I'm audible? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that this is a global problem which needs a global and unified response. Now, what do they come and ask us? They ask us the effectiveness of these treaties because for them they think that actually treaties have been signed before and they have not seen their effectiveness. But then we tell them that yes, we agree to the fact that treaties have been being signed before and over time. But this time around, we need to put policies in those treaties that when the treaties are signed, they will actually be signed for the major cause, which is to combat climate change. Treaties have been there over time and treaties have been signed. But this time we think that the UN is going to put up a more radical measure, which is going to be the UN saying no. This time around, if you sign a treaty, that means that you're going to actually follow the rules of the treaty, the policies in the treaty, and at the end of the day, we're going to be able to combat climate change. Now, they talk about involvement of many countries, but ladies and gentlemen, after thinking about involvement of many countries, they talk about the economic status of countries. But what is the economic status of a country when you actually do not understand that climate change itself is actually going to affect the economic status of countries? Because, ladies and gentlemen, look, if I'm actually having sea level rises, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, species extinction, food scarcity, what is that? Isn't that already reducing my economy as a country? So we think that there are issues of them saying that no, this is going to affect economic status. We already see climate change itself affecting economic statuses of countries, and so we think that that point of theirs of saying that no, economic status of countries is actually going to be affected is now. Ladies and gentlemen, we look at what they actually say. They say that they should first develop these countries that actually not developed, but is a global problem that we actually think needs a global solution, and a solution that we need to provide right now and then, and we can be able to save humanity because if temperatures continue to rise. First, look at this instance. Today's temperature is actually at 57.7 degrees Celsius globally. Ladies and gentlemen, if we do not take up a radical measure right about now and actually get to cut down all these temperature rises, then ladies and gentlemen, you are going to tell us that we're going to actually first go and develop countries. We think that countries cannot develop if actually their climate itself is not stable. They say they will first go and develop agriculture. After developing agriculture, they will develop economy of the country. After developing economy of the country, they will develop technology of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, and then at the end of the day, they are going to end up solving, combating what we call climate change. But finally, we need to actually understand that the steps themselves that are taking are steps that are actually going to take us a million years to actually achieve. And so we think that it is important for us to do this right about now, because as we said that signing a treaty does not actually take much time. It just takes you a single minute to sign a treaty and actually abide by the rules of that treaty. Ladies and gentlemen, they ask us, what is going to be the effectiveness of a treaty? It seems that they do not actually see that this treaty is going to be a radical measure. We tell them that these countries are part of the UN. We see that the UN is actually consisting of so many countries. Only 2 countries in the world are not a part of the UN. So what do we see? These countries are all in the UN because they know the benefits that actually come along with you being involved in the UN. We've seen what the UN has been able to do over time, ladies and gentlemen. And so we think that if these countries can actually say no, for us we do not want to abide by this, then the UN is actually going to kick them out of its organization. What does this mean? It means that the country itself that has actually seen the benefits the UN has had on it is not going to accept itself to be kicked out of the UN. And that is why we think, ladies and gentlemen, that this measure that we are going to take is a radical measure that is going to help us at the end of the day be able to actually combat climate change, ladies and gentlemen. Now we see that these policies are going to be strengthened in our side in the treaties, so that when we actually put an effort in strengthening these policies in the different treaties that have actually been signed over and over again, that they do talk about themselves, then this is going to help the different countries actually get to understand that this is a global problem. Just like I said in the very beginning, it is a global problem, and a global problem which needs a global and unified response. And a unified response that we can actually give right now is us being able to sign these treaties and actually follow what the UN is saying. They talk about the different countries actually having different climates, but we think that, ladies and gentlemen, it is not necessarily to say that all the countries in the world are actually going to neglect doing A, B, and C because we think A, B, and C is the one that is causing climate change in that particular country. But when we think that every country having its own ways of how they are actually leading to climate change being worse. And for example, if in Uganda we are cutting down trees, in another country, maybe Rwanda, they are releasing maybe so much carbon dioxide because of the different industries. We think that the UN can actually be able to tell these countries, so look, here in Uganda, no more cutting trees. Here in Uganda, if you cut down a tree, carry out afforestation. There in Rwanda, if you actually want to continue to use these industries, release these gases into the atmosphere, then you have to do something that is going to bring back these gases so that you can be able to combat climate change. So for the different countries around the world, for the different countries around the globe, they're going to have different ways they will be solving the climate, particularly in that country. But after having signed a treaty that is going to see these countries, all of us, benefit, since this is a global problem, just like I say, that needs a global approach, ladies and gentlemen, because we cannot keep seeing ourselves having food scarcity, worsening health and poverty for millions of people worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, we think at the end of the day, what are we going to be able to achieve? We are going to be able to achieve humanity panel, because if we do not save humanity today, we will not be able to save it tomorrow in 2050, when there's actually nothing big to do, when we're actually all going to die by then, because the temperatures will have risen and we cannot be able to do anything. So ladies and gentlemen, we think it is time for us to actually accept the UN to be in the lead of it, and at the end of the day, be able to achieve the combating of climate change in the years to come, ladies and gentlemen. Just like I say, our major aim here is to save humanity, because if we don't save ourselves now, then we will not be able to save ourselves later. I beg to rest my case.
Thank you very much. Second affirmative. At this juncture, I'll welcome the second negative speaker. Here.
Let's hope I'm audible enough.
You sure are.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, the other side of the house and the negators, we appreciate all the arguments that have been put across. But then we're looking at this motion today. This house as the UN, we, the house as the UN, this is an ACTA motion, remember, as our first stated. We will support a more radical approach during COP28 and coordinating global efforts and combating climate change. I want to redefine the motion because I agree with what my own first speaker stated earlier. But then in this kind of a debate, we are going to act as the UN. We are not going to speak at a perspective of another person. When we come to this motion today, before I move anyone, allow me remind the House that the other side of the House is supposed to be suggesting that radical approaches could apply in this kind of motion. But then we, as the side of the House, we as the UN, we said no. We would support. We would not support a more radical approach during COP28 in connecting global efforts to climate change due to the reasons that our first speaker gave. Now we look at the non-radical approaches, or the ones that they could call the traditional approaches, because remember that the radical approaches are interventions that involve fundamental and significant changes, or innovations that challenge established norms and traditional methods. So which are the traditional methods that are going to be challenged? Let me give a list of these. One is adoption of solar energy, wind, and hydroelectric power. Then there is international agreements, as someone mentioned from the other side of the House. We are going to look at them at a perspective that we, the side of the House, say that we're supporting the traditional methods, and then the other side of the House that is supposed to be supporting the radical approaches is again also supporting the traditional methods, which indicates that the other side of the House is not sure yet of the motion. Well, when you look at more of the traditional approaches, we have something like conservation and preservation. We have promotion of recycling, for example, recycling of paper, plastic bag, polyethylene, and other materials that would have effect on the environment. We have massive reforestation and afforestation. We are looking at a perspective that the other side of the House has failed to provide us what are the radical approaches, and then they are instead supporting the traditional approaches that we as the UN are saying the traditional approaches are more appropriate here. And then we have considerations why we say we support the traditional approaches. Like our first speaker said, we should have consideration for economic stability. Well, when you look at the radical approaches, for example, we have some things like the carbon removal technology, we have the geoengineering edge solar radiation, we have renewable energy. We're going to look at this as unaffordable to some countries in the world. Right now, we're even having some countries where solar energy is not working efficiently. Why? They have not yet invested enough into solar energy because it is an expensive project. We are going to look at ensuring social equality. Now, when we are going to look at this in a way that the other side of the House is coming in and informing us that informing us that climate change is a thing that affects the whole globe and it has to be combated together. Yes, that is true. That was also standing on. But then we are saying, how are we combating this very problem? Of course, as my first speaker mentioned, we are going to combat it globally. Like we're going to make unities. But then these are not just treaties. There is a difference between a unity and a treaty, because like you mentioned earlier, the other side of the House, that signing treaties would help to provide, would help to solve this very problem seen. But we have seen a lot of this is like the Paris Agreement, the UN Framework of Conservation and Climate Change, UNFCCC. We are looking at the zone, at the Vienna Convention, and then the ones that we can call the Paris Agreement too. All these have failed. Why? Because in the first place, if we are signing these treaties for a purpose of introducing radical approaches, we are not signing these treaties for purposes of agreeing and adopting the traditional approaches. Now, the other side of the House comes in and they tell us that applying radical approaches will provide the development of the countries. We look at it and be like, no. So most of these approaches are extremely expensive. Up to right now, carbon removal technology, it has not been achieved in the United States, which are one of the superpower countries in the world. How do you expect a country from Uganda to also achieve the same, and you people like it to help in development? How will something that is reducing the GDP of a country help in its development, other than pulling it backwards into things that into pulling it backwards into now maybe debts and some other things, into begging funds from IMF and other organizations? So the other side of the House, as I said, that they're acting at a perspective where they are not the UN. They are simply telling us that the UN would possibly support most of these countries. But no, that is not the point. The point is, even the UN Framework Convention Climate Change Program, and then how do we expect
Time up.
For that, I rest my case.
Okay, thank you. Second negative speaker. I'll welcome the third affirmative speaker to wrap up the affirmative case. Here.
Okay, I'll begin. Let me set my timer. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, what you need to set your eyes onto is what this motion really requires. We are not looking at a solution to combating climate change. These particular solutions have already been put into status quo, but just because the countries are not adhering to the particular policies, when a country is having a lot of trees being cut down, and the UN tells them that stop cutting down trees, they do not agree to this simply because that particular treaty they have signed does not really have penalties on it. Let me first dig into their case. They're telling us that they are going to adopt tradition, they're going to make people adopt traditional measures, but there's no guarantee that the particular countries are going to agree to this. The first figure tells us that there's no guarantee that people are going to adhere to signing treaties. But it's the same thing. We rebut that by telling them that this is going to have a penalty now. That if at all you don't agree to what the treaty says, you're going to end up being kicked out of the UN. But they're saying their traditional methods are not really something that they are showing us that is going to be guaranteed that countries are going to actually face it. But if I talk to sign treaties, and we know that the solution in a particular country is to adopt traditional methods, and they have signed the treaties, and we're telling them that we are not telling them that adopt traditional methods due to that particular treaty, and we tell them that that treaty has penalties, they're going to obviously adhere to it. They tell us that already the treaties are already existing and they're signing them, but they're failing. Why are they failing? There's no penalty. But now that we have put the penalty, which is the radical approach we are talking about, it is going to end up being something that is more sustainable, because countries are going to adhere to this simply because they still want the advantages of being part of the UN. They're telling us that the purpose of the treaty is based on we are telling them that the purpose of the treaties are going to be based on weaknesses. These treaties are going to be diversified. We're going to look at what is the main basis of the problem in a country. Like maybe let's say that their carbon emission, and we tell them that you're signing a treaty to reduce your carbon emission. In the end of it all, you understand that this is something that is flexible in the end of it all. But if I don't have to looking at something like traditional methods, what if a country doesn't really need to adhere to traditional methods, and its solution is something else, like stopping the cutting down of trees? How are you going to make them do that if at all the solution in that country is something different, right? They're talking about the fact that the countries have different social and political statuses, and they all don't need the same treaties, right? But you understand that our treaties are not fixed. They have different policies that are going to be put on them. That if I don't want you to stop doing this because it's what is going to help your climate change stop, and that is what we're going to have to be signing, right? They have no right. This particular debate is not something that is trying to find a solution for climate change, because everyone knows what they're supposed to do to stop climate change, stop the cutting down of trees, reduce their global emissions. But we are understanding that they are not adhering to these particular policies. Why? So this particular resolution wants us to give a way in which we are going to coordinate global efforts, not to solve climate change, but to coordinate global efforts. Telling people to adhere to traditional methods, those are things that are okay, right? Those are things that are already existing, blah, 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 blah. But in the end of it, we want how people are going to be involved. How are we going to guarantee that people are going to be involved in this fight? Let me tell you how this is going to happen, right? The sustainability, right? A treaty is diversifiable, it is dynamic, it is changeable. If I know this particular country has a social and political status that does not actually require some principles, we can change those principles for that particular treaty with that particular country. But they're telling us that they're going to develop the countries. But what about countries that don't really need to be developed in the end of it all? How are you going to actually help them be involved in the particular fight? Because you're going to look at things like developing, you're going to focus on that. But countries like the United States of America don't really need developing, and they are going to be staring at you, waiting for you to give them a solution that is something that you don't need. But if I don't to sign treaties with USA and tell them that the problem that the reason to why your climate change is happening in your country is because of this and this and this, and if you stop doing this, this is what's going to happen. Then we go to another country. If I thought that particular country needs to stop cutting down trees, we sign a treaty based on what it needs to do, right? The relevance, right? But and tell you that the development cannot happen with climate change still in existence. What we need to first do is to actually combat climate change, because the reason why these particular countries are under is because the climate change is there. So if you're trying to tell us that you're going to first develop them before removing the reason to why they are underdeveloped, it's not really seeming to be relevant in a the house. Let's talk about who is really solving the climate change problem, right? We are just here to encourage cooperation and encourage global efforts to combating climate change, not to really actually combat climate change, because those particular policies have already been experienced, because people already know what they're supposed to do to actually combat climate. We just want to have a collective unified situation whereby every person is going to adhere. So that's why we are making treaties that whereby if all these particular people don't adhere to these particular policies, they're going to face penalties. This is going to encourage them, incentivize them, or maybe force them to actually adhere to the policies that are actually being put in place, the policies to which they already know that are supposed to be the things that they're supposed to be doing, right? So we talk about urgency, right? How long is it going to take for the United Nations to develop a country panel? This is something that requires urgency. We're telling you that the ozone layer is dying. and they're actually facing effects that are actually irreversible. So the moment these particular things happen, there is no. So if I don't wait and then we first develop, and then we first the technology, it's going to end up showing us that this is not going to happen, right? I rest.
Thank you. Third affirmative speaker. I'll welcome the third opposition speaker to wrap up the opposition case and the debate.
Okay, thank you, Speaker. Thank you, Judge. My speech begins in 3, 2, 1. Chair, one thing we need to first understand in today's motion is what comes from the government bench. What comes from the government bench is that they want to first solve climate, then develop. But Chair, one thing we need to first understand is know that climate change is something that will be developed after today, something that will be stopped after today's. No, this is something that is going to be stopped, that is not supposed to be stopped in 2 days, in 2 years, or but it will have to be solved in the coming years. So the argument that they come to present to us that they want to first solve climate change, then develop, at the end of the day is null and void, because it's legitimate, is questionable. And say that the countries that are not developed are the countries that are causing climate change. Yeah. If you have to see the countries that are causing the most greenhouse emissions, the countries that are having the high carbon emissions in the atmosphere are countries that have developed. And what is and how is the more radical approach going to? And one thing we need to understand is that these countries that are having the highest carbon emissions in area are the countries that are developed and are the countries that are almost controlling the UN. So at the end of the day, the buying of saying that the policy that they are going to put up is going to stop these countries from doing such stuff and stuff. Then these countries also have a bind that if you don't want us to emit carbon emissions, maybe we should stop funding, because we know US is one of the highest funders of the UN. At the end of the day, we see that policy will not be able to come and act on that. USA, the signing of treaties, yes, USA is going to sign a treaty, but it knows you are the UN. I'm the one who funds you. At the end of the day, who's going to make a loss? It means UN knowing that the funders are going to put away if it puts strong policies in their laws. At the end of the day, it will end up not even implementing these laws, and at the end of the day, the signing of the treaties is questionable because it's implementation in countries that are powerful, and in countries that are even support that need these treaties. At the end of the day, it is not achievable, because we know, yes, the signing of treaties will come in Uganda, it will work. In Tanzania, it will work. But at the end of the day, Uganda and Tanzania versus USA, which one is climate change and supposed to be affecting those who are funding the UN? Are bosses to come and give them that they sign a treaty and that they put policies that they will allow them to enforce that treaty? At the end of the day, the legitimacy of the signing of these treaties is not available. So, Chair, we see that the whole government case they are presenting to us is only tackling the climate change in countries where there is least climate change and where we are having the highest portions of climate change. That policy is not applying, and we think that at the end of the day, the major aim of today's debate is to see who solves climate change better, and what involves in solving climate change. These countries that are the higher emitters should stop, and government bench presents to us signing of treaties, and I've shown you that the signing of treaties will not work on these highest carbon emitters. At the end of the day, we see that the problem is more solved on the government, on the opposition side, and at the side and more than on the proposition side. Then the second thing, they're saying that signing of treaties takes a second. That is on the question of urgency. But something that is logical. If USA comes and signs a treaty that we are going to reduce carbon emissions, at the end of the day, if it refuses to sign, what are you going to do to them? They come in this debate and say that we are going to put in policies. What are those policies that are going to make US, which is the chief fund of the UN, to follow the rules of the UN? Let us take, for example, between Israel and Palestine, there was a signing of a law between USA, Israel and Palestine, that Palestine should stop fighting. But at the end of the day, what is happening? These people broke the treaty, and fighting has continued. And what is US, the mediator, which was the chief side of the treaty, doing? It is doing nothing, because it knows is one of its brother, than at the end of the treaties will not even work, because the chief funders of UN cannot engage on those grounds. So finally, the point of treaties lies null and void, showing you the inefficacy of them, the necessity they are not achieving, and even on the grounds of urgency. We see you're signing of treaties, you're saying it will be urgent because if we sign treaties, countries will agree, then they will do this, and this. But then you're not giving us the metric of this, how these countries are going to do them. Because one, USA is a developed country. You have Uganda, which is not a developed country, and then you're saying we are going to sign a treaty so that Uganda can stop carbon emissions and USA can stop carbon emissions. So okay, I'll show you it will be applicable in Uganda. Uganda will reduce carbon emissions, but you don't give us the justification that policy that will affect the chief funders of the UN. That justification that UN, which is the son of USA and China, which are the highest carbon emitters, we don't get that justification, and that is the point that gives the side opposition tonight's debate. But
Time. Your time is up.
Okay, with this, I beg to rest my case.
Okay, thank you very much, speakers, for such a fine semi-final debate. I really appreciate all of you for having reached this far, and I wish you the very best. I wish all of you could reach the finals if it is possible. But as of now, we'll take our leave. You'll receive your results later on. All the best. Sharon, Cynthia, you can join me in the deliberation room.